Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Leveraging the Every Student Succeeds Act to Advocate for the Arts. My name is Sherilyn Seeley, Programs Manager for Grantmakers in the Arts. Grantmakers in the Arts is a national association of public and private arts funders. Our mission is to provide leadership and service that advances the use of philanthropic and governmental resources to support the growth of arts and culture. In this webinar, we revisit the Every Student Succeeds Act with Jane Best, Director of the Arts Education Partnership at the Education Commission of the States in Denver, Colorado. Dr. Best will provide an overview of ESSA and the value it brings to states via a case study on her work in partnership with the California Alliance for Arts Education. Special guests Joe Landon, CAAE Executive Director, and Title I Program Director Laura Smyth will speak to the positive impact of arts education advocacy on their Title I initiative. And Dr. Best will close the presentation with some key next steps for funders. Dr. Best has extensive experience working among practitioners, policymakers, and researchers. She previously held leadership positions at McREL International, Learning Point Associates, now American Institutes for Research, and the National Conference of State Legislators. She also serves on GIA's Arts Education Funder Coalition, an interest group within GIA for funders with an arts education passion and portfolio, open to members and non-members. We're glad to have her leading this webinar, and I'll be joining after the presentation to facilitate a Q&A. Before we start, a housekeeping note. Throughout the presentation, you can type questions to the presenters or myself into the rectangular box at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get all of them during the Q&A session. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Welcome, Jane, Joe, and Laura. Jane, why don't you kick us off?
Terrific. Thanks for having us. And I am really happy to be here alongside my friends Joe and Laura to talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act and talk to you about the Education Commission of the States and the Arts Education Partnership and the great resources that we have to support arts stakeholders, as well as have the opportunity to work alongside the California Alliance for Arts Education and have Joe and Laura highlight the terrific work that they're doing. So as we get underway, before we dig into the Every Student Succeeds Act, I thought I would just spend a few minutes talking about the Education Commission of the States and talking about the Arts Education Partnership and how that interplay works to set the stage for the stakeholders for arts and education. So the Education Commission of the States, as Sherilyn mentioned, is based in Denver, Colorado. We are a nonpartisan organization that addresses issues from early childhood through access to college. It's important to note that we do not advocate, and as a consequence, we see ourselves as a trusted advisor to policymakers across the landscape of education. So in this slide, as it says, we believe that informed policymakers create better education policy. So as a consequence, Education Commission of the States works with state education leaders to provide unbiased research, write reports, provide targeted technical assistance, and opportunities. So let me talk to you a little bit about what I mean about that. First of all, when I say we deal with education stakeholders, these are the folks we serve. So we have 350 commissioners who care about education across the spectrum from early childhood through access to college. These stakeholders include governors, chief state school officers, also known as your state superintendents, chairs of the Senate Education and the House Education Commission in the states, as well as higher education executives and policy leaders such as school board members, state board members, and the like. Now, what Education Commission of the States does is provide strong research. We issue reports, and we're going to share a lot of those with you today. We conduct counsel and provide testimony before state legislatures across the country, and we create opportunities for convenings and for you to attend big meetings where we present these issues. Now that is the backdrop of Education Commission of the States and the reach that we have. The Education Commission of the States is the home of the Arts Education Partnership, which for many of you who are not familiar, AEP, as we call it, is a cooperative agreement that takes place between the National Endowment for the Arts and the U.S. Department of Ed. We are made up of over 100 stakeholders that all come together around the mission that arts be part of a child's well-rounded education. And as an organization, we are, as in the slide it states, we are dedicated to advancing the arts and education through our work with research, policy, and practice. We serve as the nation's hub for individuals and organizations committed to arts being part of a high-quality education. And we serve our partner organizations by providing priority access, research and information and communication, as well as opportunities to collaborate. So as I mentioned, the wide swath of reach that Education Commission of the States has above and beyond the arts, we have the ability to do a deep dive within the arts and education community to serve our partner organizations and folks such as you on this webinar to provide great information to serve you and your respective constituencies as you work to champion your endeavors. So some examples of some of our partners, because you've heard me mention that we have over 100 partner organizations, and it's important to note that we bring together not just arts organizations, but folks on the education side of the equation as well. And through our work, we work with, this is just a small sample, but I know that Americans for the Arts is very active with grant makers as well as grant makers and the arts being a partner. California Alliance, who we're going to highlight today. But it's important to note that there's big national education organizations such as NAESP, the National Association of Elementary School Principals. So we believe in order to advance arts and education, we need to address both sides of the continuum. Folks who care about education, education research and policy, as well as those dedicated to the arts. So from there, let us do a deep dive into the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the purpose of the call today. My purpose today is to do the backdrop of the Every Student Succeeds Act. I'm going to unpack the law for you a little bit, highlight some of the opportunities for the arts. Then I'm going to turn the conversation over to Laura and Joe so they can bring these opportunities to life and do a deep dive into Title I. So starting from the beginning, we know that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was first passed in 1965. Over the years, we have seen different iterations of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and we've seen it take on new names, such as the No Child Left Behind Act that was passed in 2001. And today we know that the law exists as the Every Student Succeeds Act that was passed in December of 2015. Now the reason why this is interesting for the arts is, as well as other education topics I would add, or education content focuses I'd add, is that there was a shift in authority from the federal government to greater attention for the states. And when I say that, the states have more authority over standards, assessment, and accountability. They have more responsibility with respect to enforcing requirements. And finally, the authority shift was not absolute. There still are some federal requirements, such as submission of state plans, that exist. So let me unpack that a little bit more for you. Back to what I said. Though we had previously been under No Child Left Behind since 2001, in December of 2015, ESSA was passed into law, okay? Then a period of negotiated rule making took place in the window of February through November of 16. From February to March of 2017, select federal regulations were rolled back, and we found ourselves in the throes of a process of a new administration and state plans being submitted to the U.S. Department of Ed. Now, for those of you who know what's happening in your state, you also know that there were 2 phases of state plans and submission, but the final and all plans had been submitted last September of 2017. So now, today, we find ourselves in 2018 and beyond, and we find ourselves in the throes of the revisions and updates to state plans, and this has given us the opportunity to look at the arts, look at opportunities for the arts, and see what makes sense within the Every Student Succeeds Act. So let's talk about the highlights for the arts and education. First and foremost, the way that the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, differs from No Child Left Behind is that there's new and clear intent to support the arts replacing core academic subject. That was the language from NCLB, and today we use the language well-rounded. Secondly, there are opportunities for the arts within Title I, which is also known as Opportunities for Disadvantaged Students, Title II, which is Professional Development for Educators, and Title IV, 21st Century Learning Communities and Block Grants. Third, there's encouragement for arts integration across subjects, including STEM. We find ourselves in a world where people are increasingly seeking opportunities and encouraging proposals that provide opportunities for arts within science, technology, engineering, and math. And lastly, there's encouragement of stakeholder engagement as part of the state plans that each state must submit. So what do we mean by well-rounded, for those of you who are wondering? I've highlighted on this slide the definition of well-rounded education. This is the language that appears in the Every Student Succeeds Act, which makes it a little unique to this iteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act versus what was previously there under No Child Left Behind. And in the highlighted area, you will see that the term well-rounded education includes both arts and music, as well as any other subject as determined by the state or local arts agency with the purpose of providing all students access to enriched curriculum and education experience. So, as I remind you, as of last year, the states had to submit their state plans, and we, as well as many partner organizations to the Arts Education Partnership, were interested to see how the arts fared within state plans that were submitted to the U.S. Department of Education. You might be interested in knowing that 35% address access and participation rates in arts education as part of their state accountability and reporting systems. 70% address the arts as part of a well-rounded education. 24% call out arts education within their after-school 21st century learning communities. And finally, states included mention of arts education in other areas of state plans, such as school improvement, professional development, rural and low-income schools, as well as support for homeless youth. Now I'm going to just pause right here on this slide to say, though I've given you all of this in 4 bullet points, on our website, when I share more resources, we've kind of unpacked more of this information and done a formal write-up on what some of these things look like, and we'll give you access to that at the tail end of this webinar. So, in line with the access that we're going to give you to the resources we have to offer our partner organizations and their constituencies, something important that you should know that the Arts Education Partnership does is it deeply analyzes state plans and looks at state policies, supports state plans. So here's a rubric that you can find on our website. We've listed our website there, aep-arts.org. And you can see on this slide, we take a look at music and the arts and how each state has articulated the arts and music across these different areas of accountability, their data dashboards, Title IV, professional development, 21st century learning communities, as well as homeless children and youth, and music and the arts for school improvement. This is a great opportunity for if you're interested in honing in on one state, if you're looking at emulating another state, for you to dig into our database and take a look at what the state plans are and how different or similar various state plans are with respect to the arts and music. Another resource I want to share with you that we've worked closely with our AEP partner organizations and had a great amount of collaboration across our partner organizations is a policy brief that we are constantly in the process of updating. A year and a half ago, right after the Every Student Succeeds Act was passed, we created a document called Mapping Opportunities for the Arts. Each quarter, we issued a new chapter to this document, and we unpacked the opportunities for the arts. As you can see listed on this slide, we've broken these into Title I, Part A, accountability, assessment, state plans, stakeholder engagement, well-rounded education, and tiers of evidence. For those of you who feel like you've seen this document before, I ask you to remember that this is a dynamic document. So if you've seen the document from a year ago, I encourage you to revisit it, because what we're in the throes of now is returning to areas like Title I and accountability and the other breakout sections, and highlighting state activity and what different states are doing with respect to these different subcategories of the law. So though you may think you've seen this document before, I remind you it's a dynamic document that's constantly being updated with real-life state examples. So moving along to show you what I'm talking about, first and foremost, I'm going to show you an example of how states have addressed accountability. If you dig into this ESSA document, which we believe is an enormous value added to the arts and education field to understand ESSA, you will see that we have unpacked the different states that intentionally address accountability within their state plan. And when I say accountability, what I mean is the metrics that a state puts forth on if it has met its goals. Things such as participation rates in arts and school climate, those are things they may be using to address accountability. Second, with respect to assessment, we put forth an example, and on this slide I'm showing you Washington. So you might look at assessment, meaning that what is the student progress? How are we measuring student learning with respect to the arts? Okay, those are two examples taken from the chapters. I'm going to show you a third example, and that is stakeholder engagement. As I mentioned to you previously, the Every Student Succeeds Act differs from No Child Left Behind in that there is a section around stakeholder engagement. So here we put forth an example of Indiana, where the Indiana has formed an arts education network. In that, they are articulating various stakeholders invested in ensuring that the arts are part of their state plan and how they move forward as part of a well-rounded education. And when I say stakeholders, I mean things such as, individuals like parents and community leaders, as well as teachers and school leaders, and an area for public comment. So they get engagement from everyone in the state that there's the skin in the game around arts being part of a well-rounded education. So speaking of well-rounded education, in that chapter, I just want to sum up for you that within the Every Student Succeeds Act and the state plans that were submitted, and articulation around what a well-rounded education looks like, I can tell you that 36 states within the state plans include the arts in Title IV. 8 states include the arts in Title II, which is professional development for educators. And finally, 12 states articulate them within the 21st century learning communities. So all of this, in addition to finding the mapping document where we unpack the Every Student Succeeds Act and do a write-up for opportunities for the arts, all of this you can find on our website. Additionally, you can find a graphic called Art Scan at a Glance, where we pull and work with the state directors of arts agencies. We pull information to look at the state policies in each state that support the arts. So we encourage you to look at that document as well to align the state policy within the opportunities for the Every Student Succeeds Act. I mentioned a wealth of resources that we have on our website. This is the page that you will find on our website. In addition to everything that I've talked to you about today, if you go to aep-arts.org/ESSA, you will find the documents I've talked to you about today, but you will also find that we have gone out and prospected our partner organizations as well as the U.S. Department of Ed and other education associations to prospect what ESSA resources exist to serve stakeholders in the arts. You can find that all on our page, as well as write-ups and blog posts. So at the Arts Education Partnership, we work at the high 30,000 feet level, but we work constantly with our partners so we can get tangible evidence of how things are playing out in the state. The state that I'd like to highlight today is California, because California has done some incredible work with respect to Title I. We have had a relationship with Joe and Laura and the California Alliance for Arts Education for quite some time now, learning from them about how they use our resources to propel their work forward, how we can learn from how their work is evidenced in the state. And from that, then we tend to work side by side so we can write success stories that we then can share with policymakers across states so they can learn from the great work of California and possibly emulate it or understand how it might play out in their own state. So you'll find these two stories on our website at the Arts Education Partnership. But I thought for the purposes of this webinar today, it was critical to bring both Joe and Laura into the conversation so they can unpack Title I in the arts, the incredible work they're doing in California, and together we can answer questions around at the tail end of this webinar about how might we best assist you in your work. So with that, I'm going to turn this conversation over to Joe Landon and Laura Smyth at the California Alliance for Arts Education.
Thank you, Jane. This is Joe Landon. I'm talking to all of you from a hotel in California with questionable Wi-Fi service. So if I drop out at some point, Laura will pick up the baton and bring it home. And I just wanted to say how pleased we are to be in on this conversation. We were brought into, we are a policy and advocacy organization, and so we look at issues very much through that lens. We were brought into the discussion in a particular school district in California where Title I funds, there was an edict that went out that Title I funds were not to be used for arts education purposes. Title I, for those of you who are not familiar, is a $15 billion federal program that serves the needs of the most underserved students. California gets $1.5 billion of that money. So there is a history of support at the Department of Education, letters from Arnie Duncan and before him Rod Page, affirming that it may be appropriate to use Title I funds for arts education. So we wondered how it was possible that at the district or school site level that opportunity was being denied. So we began to dig into that, discovered a culture which is probably best characterized as inundated with the fear of reprisal at each level, that someone would determine that those funds were misused if you were spending them on arts education. And underneath all of that, we found the question, the alive question for so many people as to whether arts education is actually an appropriate vehicle for serving student needs and promoting student success. So in the process of uncovering the truth of the situation, our greatest ally was the resource that Jane was referring to, Arts Ed Search, which was created by the Arts Education Partnership, which functions as a warehouse of the best of arts education research, which is made accessible to everyone. And when we went into those conversations at the state and the district level, we were armed with that resource, which essentially said, if you have doubts about the appropriate use of arts education, take a look at the research. And that essentially was what we rode through the various conversations, both locally and statewide, to promote this work to where we are today. And Laura will be talking in just a moment about that. I would just add to this that as funders, I encourage you to consider the role that you can play in supporting the work.
All right, this is Laura. I'm going to hop on here since we're losing Joe's voice and just pick up on what he's saying. There you are. Okay. At the heart of it, what Joe was talking about is that the overall goal of our initiative in terms of clarifying what schools are able to do with their Title I funds and clearing up the confusion around the appropriateness of arts education. We felt for ourselves as an advocacy organization that the overall goal of our initiative was to give local schools the flexibility to decide what they were going to do with their Title I funds, to have a good enough grasp of the possibility of the Title I work itself, but particularly that connection to the arts, the research from Arts Ed Search that showed the appropriateness of the arts and how to connect that to the Title I planning cycle, so that schools, if they felt like they wanted to use their Title I funds to support art strategies, that they would be armed with the information to know that they could implement those strategies with appropriate accountability to Title I programs. And they could have some tools and resources, some examples that demonstrate how arts-based strategies support Title I goals. And after talking to people at the state level and at the district level, when we were looking at the best way as a small organization to try to create an initial resource to get that information to the districts and the schools that we were working with, we thought, well, you know, we'll build a website. This next slide here, the policy pathway slide, really just talks about what Joe was giving an overview of coming up to the bulk of our work. Once we had shown that there was this gap in policy and practice, that we knew you could use the Title I funds, but people weren't actually doing it to support arts education, and we'd clarified those uses, we decided that we would try to put all of those things together in a usable resource for the whole community. And so we decided to build a website, Title1arts.org. We published a policy paper leading up to that to support what we were going to do. And we were able to secure letters at the state level and to publish the letter that, from the federal level. And all these resources are on the Title1arts.org website that I'll be talking about in a second. I'm going to flip through these slides and come back to them in just a second. So the purposes of the website are to be a resource for stakeholders, so decision makers at the county level, at the district level, at the school level, depending on what kind of control those school leaders have over what to do with their resources. And the website itself, our goal in creating it was to make it as easy as possible to use, that nothing on the website would be more than 2 to 3 clicks down to be able to get the information that you needed. Principals and district leaders are busy people. They want to be able to get to the answers that they need quickly because they've got to go back and serve the needs of their teachers and their students. So the website itself goes through the Title I planning cycle, which is a year-long planning cycle required for every school and community to put together a plan. It outlines the appropriate uses of Title I funds for arts education strategies. It needs to be backed up by evidence-based research as shown through the examples that we have from Arts Ed Search. It needs to go through a year-long planning process that involves community stakeholders in making decisions about how the Title I funds are going to be used. There needs to be a plan submitted, and there needs to be some evidence that you're going to evaluate that plan. And on the website, we go through each step of that planning process, and we have this sort of mandala that shows the planning cycle, the annual planning cycle for Title I. And we showed through the website how that planning guide is aligned both with Title I planning cycle guidelines at the federal level and also the state of California interpretation of those guidelines, so that there's not any daylight between those two things. And at the end of the day, that the site would be able to also connect school leaders to some examples, some testimonials, and other resources around Title I and arts education, so that it's not just a lot of information about what your plan needs to look like, but actually has some examples of how people are actually doing it. This is what the Title I homepage looks like. So when you get to www.title1arts.org, you go here and you can look. You'll see that the Start Here button in the middle will lead you straight to our California website, but it also has links to sister sites that we've developed in New Jersey and Arizona, because our goal from the beginning in working with the Arts Education Partnership and other national organizations is Title I is federal legislation, and while there are some differences in the ways that states are putting together their ethic accountability plans and putting together resources around how they're going to support those Title I plans, it's still, the legislation is the same, and the ability to use those funds to support appropriate arts education strategies is the same across the board. So it's been exciting to work with other states, and we're also working with Minnesota right now to develop their own sister site and pull together the state resources in those places and see how the resources really do carry from one state to another. This is just a little quick overview of the site. We have links to federal and state guidelines. We've got a nice little short film. We're big on trying to get the information in the most digestible way possible to the most people possible at the Alliance. We've also got some interviews with federal education officials talking about the arts in Title I. This is the mandala that I was talking about, where every school that puts together a Title I plan has to go through a similar planning cycle, where you look at your school data, you assess the needs of your school and sort of rank the top needs, you identify the strategies that you're going to use to try to meet those needs, develop a plan with your school site council or your school planning committee. It's called something a little bit different in every state, but every school has to have one. You submit the plan, you implement the program, you evaluate the impact, and then you rinse, wash, and repeat. This next slide is really the heart of the website and kind of the heart of our project, and it goes back to what Joe and Jane were both talking about, that all of this work is undergirded by research, and none of us should be afraid to talk about the connections between the arts and all of the Title I goals. Student learning and mastery, school culture and climate, student engagement, and parent involvement are kind of the foundation stones of Title I legislation. Student learning and mastery being at the center of it, and all of those other pieces being the supporting factors that lead to student learning and mastery. And we've got a great deal of research in the arts that shows the relationship between arts education and all four of those goals. And so if you go to this matrix on the website, you can actually find little summaries of the research at the elementary, middle school, and high school level for all four of the Title I goals. And you can also find links to the detailed summary that's available on the Arts Ed Search website if you need a little more information or you're just curious for your own purposes. But we try to put it into a matrix that would be the most directly useful for, again, the busy school leaders who are trying to put together a plan that they are sending to their committee and ultimately to the district and the state. I'm going to go back to the letters for a second. The other thing, the way that we put the website together is that we started with the evidence, with the place at the state level and at the federal level where there's actually been permission given and some outlining of the ways that you actually can use federal funding to support arts education. So there's a letter from the Department of Education that's been renewed, the Federal Department of Education that's been renewed every couple of years, and then the most recent letter from the California Department of Education is from February. And that's a place to start, a place to get a comfort level to say, yes, we've got permission to do this. And then the rest of the website and the other resources that we've developed are really out there to show you how. Once we'd put the website together and we were kind of trying to get it out to the community and talk to school leaders who were doing the work or who were thinking about doing the work, what we heard back was that people needed more conversations and needed maybe even more specific examples, particularly school districts that didn't have any evidence or any experience with having used federal funds with all its sort of complicated paperwork and attendant information to support arts education. So we went back to some of our colleagues who were working as county arts leads and developed the examples of what a school plan might look like if you were going to include the arts. So this example that I have up there, in California, the school site plan is called the single plan for student achievement. And every school has to submit one, and it becomes part of the district plan that's then submitted to the state under our California local control policy. So this one connects Title I to academic achievement and mathematics. And you'll see on this plan, when you, at your leisure, have a time to go back and look at it, it's pretty much a one-page visual representation of everything that you saw in that mandala. It identifies a source of data. It identifies the need that's going to be met. It says what kind of program is going to be used to meet that need and gives the research support for how the need is going to be met. And we ultimately went on to develop 10 of these, trying to reach lots of different school levels, both rural and urban school communities, both academic goals and climate and culture goals, so that people who were interested in digging into this work would have an embarrassment of resources at their fingertips to be able to use as a sample and something to work off of. And some of the examples are all in-house, working with arts teachers that are hired by the district, and some of them are working with outside resources, with community organizations as partners to come in and do either arts interventions or professional development for teachers, all of which can fall under the purview of Title I. And then finally, the last bit that we worked with was about talking to people about how to start the conversation in the community, which really sort of gets back to advocacy. The resource itself is really, we had the time, we had the connections, we had the understanding to be able to put together some resources to share around Title I. But the advocacy piece has really been helping communities understand, and particularly people working in school districts and in county districts, how to start the conversation around the arts and Title I. And so we put together a sort of two-pager that shows the connection to the research with all the 4 Title I goals on one side, make the arts a part of your school success story. And then on the other side has some suggestions, 4 things that you can do to start the conversation about Title I and the arts. And we found that together with the SIPSs, these are things, concrete things that teachers or advocates or people working in the county or district administration, particularly the arts leads, can bring to the table when they're starting to have a conversation with somebody who's making the decisions about Title I funds. And it sort of takes it down from that top resource level to something that you can actually take into a meeting. And finally, this is some contact information for us, a link to our website at the Alliance and the Title I arts.org website. And with that, I think I will turn it back to Jane in case you all have questions. We've been talking for a while, but this is just sort of an overview of the way that we've been working over the last 6 years now with Title I sort of alongside the development of ESSA and the California Accountability Plan. And it's been a really fun adventure to start to see some of this work really take root.
Great. Thanks, Laura. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you stepping in where Joe has fallen off due to some technical difficulties where he's located. So we're going to take some questions here next pretty soon. But just to kind of wrap some of this up in a bow, I want to offer for you one slide that talks about what we believe next steps and takeaways can be for funders. And again, after this webinar, all of these are hyperlinked and we can share all these resources. But we talked about the state education policy tracking that the Education Commission of the States does, and in particular the Arts Education Partnership does with respect to what each state has put in state policy, as well as what they've put in their state plans. So I encourage you as a funder in this space to familiarize yourself with what is the status of state education policy with respect to the arts, and be tracking that, and familiarize yourself with where you are today. As I mentioned before, if there's a state you wish to emulate, there's always 2 states that like to compare each other, and familiarize yourself with that system. Secondly, understand that there is funding transparency under ESSA, and so as a funder, that is an opportunity for you to see gaps and opportunities where you could come in and further leverage the opportunities that exist within a state. And third, state information requests. We at the Education Commission of the States, we do a fair amount of education requests on ESSA by title, and with this hyperlink you can get access to what are the typical questions that funders and other art stakeholders ask across the gamut. Typically they want to know things like how are Title I funds being allotted, how many states are articulating things like arts integration into STEM. But familiarize yourself with what is happening in these different areas. The second thing I encourage you to do is understand what other funders are doing in your space. I know that the arts funding community through organizations such as Grant Makers in the Arts are deeply bound and understanding. And just as somebody who's a grantee benefits from understanding what's happening in this space, I encourage you to understand what other funders are doing so you are not in the throes of reinventing the wheel, and can play off other people's investments and opportunities and goals. And last is to create strong partnerships with both the grantors and grantees. And I say this because this webinar itself and this strong friendship with Joe and Laura has very much come about because of an experience we've had with the foundation we work with. And I reached out to Jessica Mele at the Hewlett Foundation to get permission for this part of this bullet point. We're very fortunate at the Arts Education Partnership, and I think I can speak for the California Alliance for Arts Education. We're fortunate that Hewlett convenes us and provides us with an opportunity to learn about what Hewlett's priorities are, as well as what their other grantors are doing. So that is very much how Joe and Laura and I became acquainted with one another, figured out how best we can help each other's cause. And also, it gives us the ability to keep our antenna up to search for other opportunities where we might share our successes and learn from other folks. So those are my takeaways. With that, Sherilyn, I can turn it back to you if we'd like to field some questions. Sherilyn?
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think this is better. Folks can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just saying thank you, all of you, for your presentation. And I think it was really helpful for you guys to outline the tools that are on your website and different things that people can tap into to learn more about ESSA, what's happening in their own communities. So that was awesome. So we're going to start with our Q&A. And just a reminder that you guys can drop all of your questions into the box to the bottom of your screen. Now is the time to do that. So I'll be looking there to direct your questions to Jane, Laura, or Joe. But just to kick us off, Jane, I want to go back to your mentioning your work with Jessica Mealy at Hewlett. And I have a question about your work with foundations and how has that advanced your respective work? You work with foundations, other arts funders, because I know that you receive support from philanthropy. Same with Joe and Laura. So if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, sure. I'm happy to talk about that because it's just been an invaluable experience for us because, as I mentioned, when you work at an organization that represents over 100 organizations, we work really hard to bring all the arts and education organizations that we work alongside under a big umbrella. Our work, so everyone can see themselves and their respective organizational priorities in the work. So the work with the Hewlett Foundation in particular, first and foremost, as Joe and Laura have alluded to, Arts Ed Search and the database that we work really hard to keep updated of the most rigorous research that exists with respect to the important role arts play in teaching and learning. Hewlett's investment in the Arts Education Partnership is essential to keeping that database alive so that we're constantly going out and prospecting research for funders to understand the impact arts make in a kid's life, as well as respective organizations who are writing proposals for projects. So that's one way that it's invaluable. Secondly, by convening us all, we all bring our lens and the respective work we bring to the work and how we're using our grants. We bring that to the table in a way that we can leverage each other's work, we can advance each other's work, and we can keep the conversation going in the same direction, as well as document this work, in my case, as a person that is housed at a greater policy organization, document the impact of this work for a broader audience across the country.
Thank you. That was helpful. So we've got some questions from some of our participants. So first question, based on the Arts Education Partnership ESSA tracking documents, California doesn't appear to have much language in their ESSA plan related to the arts. So Jessica's wondering if the folks from California Alliance for Arts Education could speak to the arts and whether or not it does or does not appear in California's ESSA plan.
Yeah, I can speak to that if you can hear me. That was deliberately done because our Governor, Jerry Brown, wanted to keep as much distance as possible between California and federal requirements so that they would have flexibility going forward. So that the decision was that by including the arts and other subjects, they would in some way become entangled in terms of the work that was to be done in the future.
And if I could just add to that, Sherilyn, it's important to note that just because something isn't in state policy doesn't mean great things aren't happening in the arts. When we do this art scan, we're we have to hold every state to the same standard, and so if it's not in state policy, it doesn't exist on the chart. Right. But there is possibility that things are existing in school board code and other things that just don't make it as worthy of a bullet point on that document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true, and that's important to note. There's a lot going on, a lot of positive things.
Right.
And not everything's in one place, but it's happening nonetheless. We've got another question from Phyllis. How can we find out how much money has been allocated to our state by district for Title I, Title II, Title IV? And our State Department of Education doesn't always make these easily available.
You're absolutely right. It's often not very easily available. I will say that the state plans, the U.S. Department of Ed does house those state plans as they have them, so you can find the actual state plan. Now, with respect to the resource allocation or the funding that exists, that's when things get a little trickier because you're having to get into the actual respective state. And keep in mind, this, in fact, then trickles down to districts right now and which districts are being allotted the funding. So we're in the throes of unpacking a lot of that for the information that we can. But the folks who asked the question, or the person who asked the question, is well aware there's often a time lag on when we can garner that kind of information.
Can I tag onto that a little bit? I don't know a ton about,
Sure.
Yeah, this is Laura. I don't know a ton about other states. California does ultimately publish the Title I allocations by district. It doesn't get any more specific than that. It can get really difficult to get down to the school level. There's sometimes a little bit of a time lag, as Jane said, when it's up there, and it's you have to hunt around a little bit on the state education website to find it, and I think that's sometimes the case with other states as well. But it can be frustrating. It'd be great if there were a database where all the school plans were entered in, and you could actually see sort of what subject areas or what kind of program those funds were allocated to. But it's really, really difficult to get down to the very granular.
Thank you for that, and thanks for diving in, Lara. So we've got another question. Are funds better spent through influencing policy or culture? For example, policy can be short-lived, but how can we make it sustainable other than cyclical?
So is that question directed toward a funder or a state policy question?
So why don't we think in terms of state policy?
Yeah.
So obviously I work at, go ahead, Joe. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, I would jump in to say, no, Jane, go ahead. Go ahead.
Absolutely.
Well, to my experience is that we were dealing with a cultural issue, and I don't know if this is the question you're asking exactly, but that in order to address the cultural issue, which is the bias against arts education, you have to step up to the policy questions and to really look at, are the policies undermining or supporting the culture you want to promote? And I think to sort of miss that.
Great. And Jane, did you want to add to that?
Well, I would just add to the sustainability part of this question. You know, we were under No Child Left Behind since 2001 until 2015, and so that is a very long policy. So right now we are on the early side of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So in order to get to a sustainable opportunity for arts and education, we need to really shine bright lights, which is why I wanted Joe and Laura to join the discussion today on Title I. We need to shine bright lights on states who are doing important work within these various new opportunities for arts and music. So other states can learn from that. They can replicate it. They can leverage their own opportunities within respective states, because it's clear that it takes a long time to replace the landmark education bill, and we were under the last one for 14 years. So if we're looking at positive sustainability rather than just the cyclical churn of same old, now is our opportunity to really shine a bright light on the opportunities for arts and education.
Yeah, and can you, on the same note of shining a bright light and the opportunities, can you talk more about why this moment is a unique time for arts education?
Well, this moment is unique because, as I said at the start of the webinar, you know, arts and music were intentionally articulated and encouraged as part of a well-rounded education. So as a consequence, there are new funding opportunities within these various titles, but it's going to require stepping out of a comfort zone, because all of us know that oftentimes, you know, a comptroller in the State Department of Ed, or even the person doing the budget in the districts, they refer back to the old blueprint, and particularly if they've been under the same blueprint for how they're going to allocate their resources under No Child Left Behind. So the new opportunities that exist, they're going to require some, you know, arts educators and arts champions talking to the science, technology, engineering, math, or the early childhood opportunities, or the professional developments for educators. It's going to require some real aggression on the front end of this law to show how these kind of opportunities for the arts might play out. And that's why, like I said, I go back to Joe and Laura's work with Title I. They've really brought this work to life through the movie that I encourage you to look at that they've done on Title I, because these are areas for others to learn from.
Right. So we've got a few questions from participants. So out of the tools that the California Alliance for Arts Education has developed to promote arts education, which have been the most useful or the most used?
I think at the end of the day, it's those single plans in combination with the website that the people go back to the website after they've had a chance to actually play around with the single plans themselves. We found that actually the people who are making those decisions at the school level are the most familiar with that kind of documentation. So even though it looks kind of dry and wonky, people get really excited when you put it in their hands, because they're like, oh, this is what I have to turn in, and now I see what it looks like. So if what I want to do to bring more arts into my school involves a partnership with a community organization, or working with my visual art teacher to provide professional development and arts integration to all the rest of my teachers, I can see a model for doing that and I can use it. So they take that page and then they can go back to the website and the planning cycle, and it just reinforces all of that.
Great. And then, as state plans are or have been completed, is it correct that now each school district in each state will need to complete their district level as a plan that aligns with the state plan? And if so, what can we do, so what can funders do to encourage school districts to include the arts in their plans?
Well, that goes along with the whole stakeholder engagement section. So you know, we've written a chapter on that you can find online, but I'd encourage you as a funder to talk to your other arts luminaries in your district and your state, to join your school board meetings, join find out who is writing and submitting those plans at the district level, get to know who the person was that submitted or who the committee was that submitted the state plans, to understand what their vision was when they articulated the arts as part of their state plan. These are not difficult people to find. They're probably not nearly as difficult to find as finding the resource allocation budgets, because all of you are so connected in your own respective domains. But really familiarize yourself at the district and state level with the plans and the intention behind the plans. And if the ship has not already left the dock, you're right. This is an opportunity to put your 2 cents in.
Great. And then one final question to bring it home. If you had a crystal ball, what aspects of ESSA would you tell funders to keep an eye on going forward?
Yeah, so what I think right now, which is pretty interesting, is the whole social emotional learning. We're getting, at the state policy level, we're getting an increasing amount of questions around social emotional learning and the role that the arts play with respect to children and development. And so I would advise folks to take a look at that and take a look at how that topic of social emotional learning and curiosity among children is playing out in your state. And if you're hearing the conversation, then that's a conversation I would join as an arts champion.
Awesome. Well, hopefully those crystal balls appear very shortly so we can all hop on the bandwagon in that way. So thank you so much for that, Jane. And thank you, Joe, Landon, and Laura Smyth for sharing all of this important information.
Thanks, everyone.
So today's presentation has been recorded. We'll be sending a link to the file and the presentation slides within the next day or two, along with a brief survey that we hope you will take a few minutes to fill out. Your feedback is always important to us and helps us in the design of future webinars. If you'd like the opportunity to flip through the slides now, we've switched over the slide controls to you. The slides will be up for the next hour or two, and you can always reach out to me, Sherilyn Seeley, if you have further questions. So thanks, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.